bringing you information based in fact and science concerning today's marijuana. I'm your host, Chris Wolf, and this is Perspectives. With us today is a subject matter expert from the National Marijuana Initiative, sharing their perspective on the influence that today's more potent forms of marijuana products are having, both in our society and in their field of expertise. We're here today with Ed Shemelya. He is the coordinator for the National Marijuana Initiative. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Chris, and appreciate you and what you do for the National Marijuana Initiative.
My pleasure, and thank you for being here today. Ed, what should people be concerned about when it comes to the legalization of marijuana?
You know, as this country moves down the path toward legalization, I think what we need to understand is we continue to make public health, public safety decisions that are void of science and data and research. And I think when you start looking at the amount of disinformation and misinformation that is out there with respect to marijuana and the harms associated with marijuana, we need to fully grasp and understand that we are making these decisions that are void of that. And I think, as Dale and I allude to a lot of times, one of the key components of legalization and one of the beneficial aspects of legalization has been a plethora of research that is now occurring with respect to not only the beneficial components within the cannabis sativa L plant, but also the harmful consequences of marijuana use among the age spectrum in this country.
And what is the current status of marijuana regulation at the national level as well as the state level?
Well, as you know, we have 34 states that have medicalized this substance, and we have 17 states now that have commercialized THC. There is no federal regulation, and when I talk about this substance, you kind of have to put this in the frame of reference that where we are with marijuana is where we were prior to the Food and Drug Administration's exception with respect to food, drug, and cosmetics in this country. It's the Wild West. It is left to the states to develop their own regulatory mechanisms. All are well intended, but none of them are doing anything to mitigate the unintended consequences of legalization of marijuana. And when you start talking about youth usage and access to our youth, nobody is doing anything to curtail that. When you start talking about the black market and diversion, nobody's doing anything to curtail that. When you start talking about the increase in marijuana's involvement in automobile crashes and collisions, nothing is really being done to curtail that. There are a host of other public health, public safety issues that are not being addressed under the current regulatory schemes at any of the states in this country. And I understand that legislative bodies have intentions about trying to set guardrails and parameters for regulation, but to be quite honest with you, we don't see them having the impact that they were intended to have in this country.
And Ed, how different is the marijuana of today from the marijuana of years ago?
It's completely different. As a matter of fact, I don't recognize it when you start talking about the marijuana plant. Nothing has changed, but what happened in Colorado in 2012 changed the whole dynamics and discussion around the botany of the cannabis sativa L plant. Because essentially when Colorado commercialized THC, what it did is allowed the industry without federal intervention to bring in botanists and agronomists, and basically they were able to genetically engineer and modify this plant, much as we've done with corn, soybean, and all these other agricultural commodities. Not only have they increased yield, but they've also risen potency through the roof. What we saw was an average potency prior to what Colorado did. Potency of THC was around 8 to 12%. When you look at what California did in Prop 216, to give you an idea, the average potency was between 0.5% and 2%. And when Colorado does what it does in 12, you see in potency somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12% by average. After 12, and with the commercialization of THC in Colorado, you've seen an explosion in potency. So now we're seeing raw flower, raw biomass that's exceeding 30%. From that, we are concentrating marijuana in a multitude of product derivatives, and THC and potency levels anywhere up to 99%. It is nothing like, it evolves so quickly that we as experts struggle to keep up with what the industry is doing with respect to potency of today's marijuana.
Ed, I was on your website for the National Marijuana Initiative, and I saw a quote that was very interesting to me, and it went along the lines of, Marijuana is the least understood and most misrepresented substance. Talk about that.
Well, I agree it is, and I say as I give my talks across the country, this is the most dangerous drug in America, and I say so for two reasons. First and foremost, when you look at all the other illicit drug use and combine it, it does not equal half the admitted marijuana use in this country, and that number increases every year. But that's not what makes it dangerous. What makes it so dangerous, it is the most misunderstood drug in our pharmacopoeia. Your frame of reference of something is what it was when you experienced it. Nobody really grasped how much this drug has changed since Colorado legalized in 2012. And the explosion with respect to the botany and agronomy of this substance is astronomical that has occurred in the last 8 years with the legalization commercial THC in Colorado. And what's interesting about that is every state since Colorado has been the benefactor of what Colorado has done. So when you look at a state that is starting out today, they start out where Colorado is today, not where Colorado was in 2012. And that's the real danger there. But policymakers in this country, they still look at marijuana as a relatively benign, harmless substance that it was during the 60s or 70s when they experienced it. They do not understand, and even folks in law enforcement don't understand how this drug has changed with the legalization in commercial THC in Colorado and the subsequent states that followed Colorado.
So then, having said that, talk about your main concern with adolescents using marijuana and high-potency marijuana products.
Well, of course, naturally, when you look at who is using, our principal concern when you look at SAMHSA past month drug use, the three categories of 12 to 17, 18 to 25, and 26 and above, we're naturally concerned with those two categories, the first two, 12 to 17 and 18 to 25, because we know that the human brain does not fully develop until after 25, 26 years of age. And we also know what our research is telling us about the harmful consequences to the developing brain. And that's what is a real concern, particularly with what our kids are initiating with. They're not initiating 10 years ago at 3, 4, 6, 8% THC. They're actually using vaping devices that have anywhere from 30 to 60 to 70% THC. The average age of initiation is 11 years, 9 months in this country. And when you look at what science is telling us about the harmful consequences to the developing brain with THC exposure, particularly high potency THC, it should concern us all. I said, I don't think anybody in this country wants, regardless of what your position is on marijuana, we should restrict and we should limit the access to our young people. But like I said earlier, nobody is doing an effective job of mitigating the access or limiting the access to our young people. In my state, in Kentucky, where we have no medical or commercial, there is no problem finding marijuana in our schools, principally in vaping devices. And that is the method of delivery that is preferred by our young people. And again, there is where the high potency THC is. And we've got kids initiating on potency levels that were virtually unheard of 6, 7 years ago.
Ed, you are an absolute wealth of knowledge. Please come back, and thank you so much for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
To learn more facts about today's marijuana and its impacts, visit the National Marijuana Initiative's website at www.thenmi.org. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Perspectives.